this is Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. Welcome to the recording of our program on November 18, 2022.
I'm Jack Fenton, Vice President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods. I'm glad that you're able to join us this morning. And we have a wonderful speaker, John Canister, who's going to address the subject of the Mine Run campaign. And as many of you know, many of you will be joining us. We're doing a tour today of battlefield sites. And this is not something that is a standard tour, but it will take us off the beaten path and reveal even more details about the battlefield than many people know who are even experts on the topic. So we're very happy to be able to do this today and happy that many of you are joining us. We'll come back at the end of the presentation just to remind you where we'll be meeting and at what time if you're going on the tour. All right, which begins at 1 o'clock. So let me introduce John, turn things over to him. We'll have questions after from you. But we'll keep that brief because we need to make sure that John has a little time to relax before we put him to the test this afternoon too, okay? All right. Well, as I said, our speaker today is John Canister. He's originally from Torrance, California. He served in the U.S. Army and attended the University of Alabama. John was also the Education and Events Director for the Fort MacArthur Museum in San Pedro, California. Currently, John is working for the Department of Defense in the Washington area, and he has a long-time interest in Civil War history and preservation. And he's the owner and operator of the Battlefield Tours of Virginia. That organization may have been familiar to you as Fredericksburg Tours. His battlefield guide service conducting tours from all the way from the Shenandoah Valley to Richmond. He's also a member of the Friends of Wilderness Battlefield and the Rappahannock Valley Civil War Roundtable. Today, he resides on a portion of the Fredericksburg battlefield below Marie's Heights. Today's presentation is titled The Battle of Mine Run, The Forgotten Fall of 1863. Today we're very nearly at exactly the 159th anniversary of the Battle of Mine Run from November 26th to December the 1st of 1863. That was when General George Meade made his final gambit to destroy Lee's Army of Northern Virginia in the year of 1863. It was Meade's last attempt before Grant came east. Mine Run was fought in the Locust Grove Wilderness region of Orange County. Mine Run was the precursor to the Battle of the Wilderness in 1864 and the catalyst for Grant's coming east. John will highlight the preservation and reclamation of this forgotten battlefield that took place in our backyard. All right, I'm going to turn things over to John at this point.
Okay, everybody, it's a real pleasure to be here today, and I'm really excited about the talk, the Battle of Mine Run, because this is something that isn't hundreds of miles away. It's right here in our backyards, just down the road from us. As a matter of fact, like Jack said, after our talk today, after lunch, we're going to go out and explore this often forgotten battlefield. Now, the first time that I ever heard about the Battle of Mine Run, I was taking a national park tour of, all right. I was taking a national park tour like a lot of us do of the Wilderness Battlefield. And they were talking about, before the Wilderness, Grant and Meade were talking about their strategy to get at old Robert E. Lee down in Orange County. And their option A was to come barreling down the Orange Turnpike. But they remembered that the old Mine Run defenses are still there. And they would rather not go up against those old defenses. They would rather slide around them and travel through the wilderness. So there was some sort of battle that happened out here before the Wilderness that I didn't know much about. A lot of times we think that nothing happened between Gettysburg and the Wilderness. That's 10 months out of the entire Civil War. That's almost a year. Really, nothing happened. A lot of people think, well, old Robert E. Lee was whipped after Gettysburg and we just had to wait for Grant to come out east to finish him off. But it really didn't happen that way. The end of 1863, there was contact between Meade and Lee in the fall. It's often called the Forgotten Fall of 1863 because the battles might have been a little bit smaller or not as many casualties as some of those other battlefields that we're familiar with. So let's pick up with the Battle of Mine Run. And real quick, here's the Gettysburg Campaign, which we're all familiar with, ending on July 3rd with Pickett's Charge, Lee's second invasion of the North. And after Gettysburg, Lee is going to withdraw back into Virginia, and he's going to end up right here in Orange Courthouse. And Meade will eventually come down into Virginia, and he's going to be up the road across the Rapidan River, which is right here in Culpeper. Now, at first, nothing's really happening after Gettysburg out east. But guess what? Things are happening out west. After Vicksburg, Grant is going after Chattanooga, that big rail hub. And things are really happening. So much so that since Meade really isn't using the Army of the Potomac right now, Washington wants him to shift reinforcements out west because Grant could sure use them. So here's the Army of the Potomac after Gettysburg to start off our story. And I want to introduce everybody. Of course, everybody's familiar with George Gordon Meade in charge of the Army of the Potomac. We're going to shift 2 Union Corps out west to Grant. We're going to shift Oliver Otis Howard's 11th Corps and Slocum's 12th Corps. They're going to head out to Tennessee, and we're not going to see them again here. After Gettysburg, we're going to have several corps commanders that are either going to be dead or wounded that need to be replaced after Gettysburg. So after Gettysburg, things are going to look a little bit different here. So I want to introduce you to some members of the Army of the Potomac. Union 1st Corps, first day of Gettysburg, John Reynolds is shot dead. He's going to be replaced after Gettysburg by General Newton, 1st Corps. At Pickett's Charge, Winfield Scott Hancock, he's going to be wounded in the groin, and his replacement is going to be General Gouverneur K. Warren, the savior of Little Round Top, kind of an aspiring star. They're going to place him as temporary commander of Hancock's 2nd Corps, not to be confused at the Wilderness when he's in charge of the Union 5th Corps. So these are different troops. He's actually in charge of A-list troops of Hancock's boys, like the famous Irish Brigade, okay? So he's got one of the best corps right here, just before Mine Run. Dan Sickles, remember he lost his leg at Gettysburg? He's still recovering. His replacement for 3rd Corps is going to be General French. Union 5th Corps, which is what Warren's going to have at the Wilderness, we're going to have George Sykes. His nickname is Tardy George Sykes because he was late for a few classes at West Point. So that's going to stick. Tardy George Sykes. And last but not least, you might be familiar with John Sedgwick in charge of 6th Corps, Uncle John Sedgwick. And so these are the 5 Union Corps after Gettysburg out east during the Forgotten Fall of 1863. Real quick, the Army of Northern Virginia, Robert E. Lee is still in charge. To match sending reinforcements out west, Davis, there's the Army of Northern Virginia. Robert E. Lee needs no introduction. They are going to send James Longstreet's 1st Corps out west to Chattanooga, Tennessee. We're not going to see Longstreet until a month before the Battle of the Wilderness. That's going to leave 2 Confederate corps, Richard Ewell for 2nd Corps and A.P. Hill, 3rd Corps. However, before the Battle of Mine Run, Ewell is ill. He's kind of on again, off again, ill. So during the Battle of Mine Run, he's going to be temporarily replaced by Jubal Early, who eventually is going to take over full time after the Battle of the North Anna for most of the war. So these are our combatants for the Forgotten Fall of 1863, this period after Gettysburg until the end of the year. Lee sees an opportunity in October of 1863 to get at Meade across the Rappahannock River. Lee is going to leave Orange Courthouse, cross the Rapidan River, and try to get around Meade's right flank. For every 2 steps that Lee makes, George Gordon Meade is going to take 5 steps backwards, all the way back to Washington. And as the vanguard of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia gets closer to the rear of the Army of the Potomac, around Bristow Station, Warren is going to lunge out at A.P. Hill and maul him at the Battle of Bristow Station here October the 14th. And then Meade is going to go behind the Washington defenses. And just over 90 days after the Battle of Gettysburg, Lee is outside of the gates of Washington. We don't hear that. I was stunned when I saw that. I thought Lee was whipped after the Battle of Gettysburg, and here he is outside of the gates of Washington. And Meade's boss, Halleck, is saying, "Why are you letting Lee bully you around?" And Meade's excuse is, "Well, I don't know where Lee is." And Halleck says, "Well, if you'll come out and chase him, you'll find him." Lee, outside of the gates of Washington, has 3 options. Option A is to wait for old Georgie Meade to come out and play. Option B, actually, is Lee could sidestep and invade the North a 3rd time. Option C is to withdraw back behind the Rappahannock or Rapidan River. Well, he has a supply problem after Gettysburg. Quartermaster, something we don't think about. Invading the North in October and November, it's not as advantageous as June or July living off the land. Lee is going to come back behind the Rappahannock River right over here. In early November, Meade is going to come out. He's going to engage with the Army of Northern Virginia at Rappahannock Station, where there's a battle on November the 7th. At Rappahannock Station and below at Kelly's Ford, kind of a right and left punch. And Culpeper County is going to be untenable for Robert E. Lee, and Lee doesn't like the fact that the Rapidan River is at his back. So Lee will come back to Orange Courthouse, and Meade is back in Culpeper with the Rapidan River as a barrier between them. And this is part of the Forgotten Fall of 1863. Bristow Station, Rappahannock Station, and then we're ramping up to the last battle of the Forgotten Fall of 1863, Mine Run. We're in early November. Things are really cooling off. Everybody thinks that we're going to go into winter quarters. The campaign season is over. But Meade isn't ready to throw in the towel because Meade has a lot of pressure, especially after Gettysburg, to do something, to get at Lee. Things are happening out west. And here is some of the pressure that Meade has to do something. Meade is pressured to attack. He's being investigated after Gettysburg. The hero of Gettysburg is being investigated by the Joint Committee on the War. Why didn't you pursue and destroy Lee? He has a lot of critics, especially Dan Sickles, Abner Doubleday, and others. A lot of critics and backstabbers. Of course, Sickles has the power of the press in New York City with all of those slimy papers. he has a lot of pressure to match the success of Grant. Things are happening out west after Vicksburg. Chattanooga just fell. Things aren't happening out east, though, so he feels this pressure to match Grant. Of course, the press we've talked about, the press was just as horrible as they are today. The opinion of the northern people to can anybody finish off this Robert E. Lee? Gettysburg was a great victory, don't get me wrong, but it was a defensive game. Somebody's got to go into Virginia and beat Robert E. Lee, and nobody's done it. And it's not until really Grant comes out he's going to do it. But most of you know that story. The last one I didn't get on here, and that's he knows that 1864 is a re-election year for Lincoln. And there's a lot of pressure to defeat Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. So he has a ton of pressure to do one last campaign to defeat Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. And that's how we get the Battle of Mine Run. He needs to come up with a plan. So I want to share his plan with you. We've already established that Meade is up here in Culpeper. Lee is down here in Orange Courthouse, and we have the Rapidan River right here, the natural barrier. There's no more bridges. The Confederates have a line of troops along the Rapidan River called the Rapidan Line. A lot of you might have heard of. And all during the entire Civil War, we've been fighting up and down the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. You've heard of battles at Manassas, Bristow Station, Rappahannock Station. How about Brandy Station? So we've been fighting up and down this railroad, and Lee expects Meade to come barreling down the railroad and fight him in Orange County. So Lee's forces are oriented around this railroad. Meade's first instinct is to flank Lee, to come out east and come to Fredericksburg and flank Lee. And when Lincoln hears this, he says no, because Lincoln and the American people cannot take one more defeat anywhere near the city of Fredericksburg. So Lee says Fredericksburg is off limits, which is our first echo of Fredericksburg. The Battle of Mine Run has a lot of echoes of Fredericksburg. This is the first one. Burnside wanted to sidestep going from Warrenton to Fredericksburg, and things went horribly wrong. So Meade doesn't want to come barreling down the railroad tracks, and he can't go to Fredericksburg. That leaves him with a narrow width right here to operate. So what he wants to do is he wants to, based on speed and surprise, those are the keys, he wants to rapidly cross the Rapidan River just beyond the Confederate Rapidan line. He's going to cross 3 fords, Jacobs, Germanna, and the Mine Ford, and he is going to have everybody meet up, rendezvous at a place called Robinson's Tavern, which is just up the Orange Turnpike, where the Exxon station and the General Quarters restaurant was. Once those 5 Union Corps rendezvous there, then, and kind of disregard all of the units you see there, then Meade wants to stab into Orange County and hopefully destroy one Confederate corps at a time. You can't really see it, but there's a mountain here called Clark's Mountain. And we have one Confederate corps on each side. Oh, I moved too much. There's one Confederate corps on each side of Clark's Mountain. So if Meade could do this quickly and with surprise, he could destroy one Confederate corps in detail. And we know how the Army of the Potomac quickly sneaks up on Robert E. Lee all the time, right? Speed and surprise. Okay. So that's what Meade is banking on. He's going to tell all of his corps commanders, he's going to give them detailed instructions about crossing these 3 fords, laying pontoon bridging, and crossing and getting behind, rendezvous at Robinson's Tavern, and stab in there. And all of this is going to happen on November the 24th of 1863 is when the operation gets kicked off. On the evening of November the 23rd, the heavens open and there's a torrential downpour. And the operation is postponed for 2 whole days. And the Rapidan River, I just gave another PowerPoint 2 days ago on another battle, so I'm a little tongue-tied up here. These Rapidan, the banks are wider now. The roads have now just turned into mud. And Meade is still going to continue with this operation. It's going to get kicked off on November the 26th of 1863, which is actually a very special day, November the 26th. Thanksgiving. It's the first official national day of Thanksgiving that we know of today. Before, other states kind of celebrated this holiday different times in the fall. It isn't until Abraham Lincoln sets aside that kind of fourth Thursday of November that we all know. This is the very first one, a day of thanks, especially the way 1863 has gone in the war. So the Mine Run campaign, day 1, starts on our first national day of Thanksgiving. Here's an example right here of the Confederate Rapidan line that we hear about, a series of fords along the river. Here's Orange Courthouse up here, and we're kind of sitting down here off the map here at Lake of the Woods. So the plan is to speed and surprise, to rendezvous here, stab in, destroy one Confederate corps in detail before they could unite. That's his plan. Whoop. So here we go. We have the Army of the Potomac is crossing at 3 different fords. The main one here is Germanna. Of course, Lake of the Woods, we're sitting right here, right? Here comes Warren with his 2nd Corps. And here's the rendezvous point at Robinson's Tavern right there. Everyone's supposed to meet up there. So Warren is headed there. Culpeper Mine Ford. We have Sykes and Newton are crossing, and they're headed towards the Parker store, going by Elwood Manor, and they're supposed to rendezvous up at New Hope Church right there. And last but not least, we have French up here with Sedgwick. They're crossing the Jacobs Ford, which is closest to the Rapidan line. And as they're getting down there, they're going to have pontoon problems, which is our second echo of Fredericksburg. Ambrose Burnside had pontoon problems, right? Well, George Gordon Meade is having pontoon problems. 2 out of the 3 fords, they cannot get enough bridging. They were basically a bridge too short, right? Instead of a bridge too far, it was a bridge too short, okay, because the river's now wider. It's a big mess up at Jacobs Ford and Germanna. Believe it or not, the only Corps commander that could cross on the 26th was Tardy George Sykes. He's the only one that made it across. Meade says, hang on right there, I don't want you to go any further. And they're going to spend the entire day doing kind of engineer stuff, improvising and getting the bridges going, okay? And this is costing Meade's surprise element, the pontoon bridging right here. So it's not until the next day on the 27th now that they have all of the bridges up, and now they're crossing. And Warren is going to make it here at Robinson's Tavern, and he's waiting for everybody else to rendezvous and meet up with him before they all move forward. Well, we know that Robert E. Lee isn't the type of guy to sit around and wait for things to happen. As the Army of the Potomac is having these pontoon problems, their surprise element is evaporating like the morning fog. And from Clark's Mountain, Lee observes the Army of the Potomac crossing the Rapidan. So he's going to get his 2 corps in motion. He's going to have A.P. Hill come down the orange plank road, and Jubal Early Second Corps is going to come down the orange turnpike. Does that sound familiar to the Battle of the Wilderness? These two different corps going down the same roads? I heard somebody recently say just off the cuff that Mine Run was kind of the dress rehearsal for the Battle of the Wilderness, which is something I've never heard of. So there's a lot of similarities here. Warren is going to get to Robinson's Tavern, and everybody else is still kind of moving up. Here's a drawing of Robinson's Tavern up here on your right. The building still exists, it's just not in the same spot. We're going to see it on our tour. Across the road is actually the community or the actual village of Locust Grove. Today, everywhere to the Rapidan is called Locust Grove, but the actual village was right here. You can see Robinson's Tavern sits on a ridge, so it's a high piece of ground. So as Warren gets there and he's waiting for everybody, Jubal Early Second Corps shows up, and they are hot in Warren's front, and he's shocked by this. He was supposed to give the Confederates a surprise, now the Confederates are surprising the Federals. And he doesn't want to bring on a general engagement because he has no support on his flanks. Does that sound familiar to you? Warren doesn't want to bring on a general engagement because he has no support on his flank. Very similar to the first day in the wilderness at Saunders Field. So he's kind of holding Jubal Early back. Jubal Early only has 2 of his 3 divisions with him. And so here we have Warren engaging with Jubal Early. He hears that along the Orange Plank Road, they're having trouble with cavalry. Confederate cavalry is fighting against Union cavalry. At first they think it's just Confederate guerrillas that are slowing down the column, but it's really Wade Hampton with Thomas Rosser right here, and we have Gregg, and they're clashing around New Hope Church, and that's slowing down everything from uniting with Warren on his left flank. But on Warren's right flank, everything is ominously just quiet. There's no sign of French anywhere. Where is French? Well, here's French over here with his lead division. A corps normally has about 3 divisions, could have more. So here's Prince. He's going to get down to Jacobs Ford late. He's going to spend time doing a reconnaissance across the ford. He's going to take the wrong road. He's going to get back on the right road. And then he's going to come to this fork in the road right here at the Widow Morris's house, and he doesn't know which way to go. Do I go to the right? Do I go to the left? Well, Meade laid out his orders explicitly to all the corps commanders. And the orders were to take the left fork to unite with Warren. And explicitly do not take the right road, because that will take you closest to the Confederates. So he doesn't know where to go. His corps commander sets up his headquarters 300 yards behind him. Because they don't like each other, they send couriers back and forth to each other communicating instead of doing a face-to-face. And so Prince decides to send federal cavalry down each road, and that's going to take 2 hours to get some information. Whoops. And so time is going to be ticking. And when the cavalry comes back, they report seeing Confederate cavalry on the Raccoon Road. That Raccoon Ford Road goes from Raccoon Ford this way. I'm sure everybody can see all of the green on this map, right? Because this battle is fought in the wilderness region of Orange County right here. This is actually the second battle fought in the wilderness region, the first being Chancellorsville. Mine Run is the second, and the actual 1864 Battle of the Wilderness that we know is the third one. So we're having problems traveling through the wilderness. We're getting kind of confused and lost in the woods, so to speak. The Federals can hear all of the gunfire and cannons booming at Robinson's Tavern, and they actually think they're closer to Robinson's Tavern than they really are. They're about 3 miles from their destination. They think they're a lot closer. You know, we don't have a, air support to show that, oh, you're a lot closer. So Prince decides to develop this situation. Since there's already combat going on, he wants to send 2 brigades down the right side of the road to engage whatever's down there. And this is going to take time to get 2 brigades on each side of the road through the wilderness to engage. And so let's take a closer look at what's happening down here as they're traveling down the Jacobs Ford Road right here near a place called Payne's Farm. You can see there's an opening in the wilderness at Payne's Farm. And so Prince is sending his 2 brigades down this road, and it's not Confederate cavalry. What they saw was a column of the division belonging to Allegheny Johnson right here, okay? And he has about 5,000 Confederates. But what the Federals saw was in the rear he had his ambulance, wagons, and supplies. That's what they saw. Now the Confederates will see the Federals, and they think that basically they're a large cavalry component. And so Allegheny Johnson, he's trying to think about what to do. Does he want to unite with his corps, Jubal Early's corps, or does he want to deal with whatever's coming down this road? One thing I want to mention here about Allegheny Johnson's division here, since we have all of these Battle of the Wilderness fans in the room, you might recognize this division because this is the Confederate division at Saunders Field, okay? If you were to leave the Wilderness Exhibit Shelter and walk towards the Gordon Flank Attack Trail, you would run into Maryland Stewart's Virginia and North Carolinians right there, okay? Across the road at Hill Ewell Drive, a lot of people drive every single day. John Jones's Confederates would have been right there, or Rum Jones. If you take the Gordon Flank Attack Trail past Maryland Stewart, you would run into Leroy Stafford's Louisiana Tigers. And just past the Louisiana Tigers are James Walker's famous Stonewall Brigade of Virginians. And they're all right here traveling down the Raccoon Ford Road. I want to mention that this division, after the first 2 weeks of the Overland Campaign, not to confuse you, after the Wilderness and Spotsylvania Courthouse, 4 out of these 5 Confederate generals are either going to be dead or captured. Maryland Stewart captured at Spotsylvania Courthouse at the Big Mule Shoe attack, along with the division commander Allegheny Johnson. Leroy Stafford killed at the Battle of the Wilderness. John Rum Jones, bullet to the head at the Battle of the Wilderness at Saunders Field. So this is kind of their last hurrah altogether right here before the Battle of the Wilderness. So the day is kind of getting a little bit later here. Allegheny Johnson decides he doesn't want Federals in their flank and rear. So whatever's coming down this road, the Jacobs Ford Road, he wants to deal with them. And he doesn't want to just wait there for whatever's coming down. He wants to aggressively attack whatever's coming down that road. He doesn't realize that it's 2 Union Corps, French and Sedgwick, which is 30,000 men. And he has 5,000 men. That's 6-to-1 odds. Okay, again, we don't have air support or we can't see. And he's going to aggressively push back whatever's coming down this road. However, we're fighting in the wilderness, right? Which negates a numerical superiority, right? Because of all of the woods. Everybody has to travel on this road. So what Allegheny Johnson proposes to do is to get his 4 Confederate brigades lined up on this road and do a double envelopment. That is, he's going to have his, let's pretend that this aisle right here is the Jacobs Ford Road. What he wants to do is to get his left flank and his right flank to double envelop whatever's coming down that road, like this. Which means that they need to wheel, okay? Which is a very difficult military move to wheel, okay? If you've ever done a wheel, the people on this side have to take baby steps while everybody on this side has to almost run, okay? It's difficult to do in a wide open field, and they're going to do this in the wilderness, okay, trying to coordinate this double envelopment. Usually a double envelopment works out best when you outnumber your foe, but he's outnumbered 6-to-1. Really, with French in front of him, it's 3-to-1. Sedgwick's bottled up behind French. So that's what he proposes to do. This is going to get kicked off at 4 p.m. Okay, and so Maryland Stewart right here is going to be on the far left, followed by Big Jim Walker, Leroy Stafford, and Rum Jones. Okay, and so Maryland Stewart kicks it off. He starts to engage with the Federals. He does pretty good, but the Federals bring up artillery, Buckland's artillery, and you could see Stonewall Brigade is going next. Their attack is going to be basically uncoordinated. Each brigade is going to attack individually as opposed to all together because they cannot coordinate their wheels. So we have Maryland Stewart's going in first, Big Jim Walker. Of course, everybody on the far right is trying to catch up. You can see over here because they have to wheel the furthest. So we have the Stonewall Brigade goes in next. They get played out. The Louisiana Brigade goes in next. And then Jim Walker comes in last. The battle at Payne's Farm, by the way, we're at Payne's Farm. The actual farmhouse was right there. This is going to last about an hour, from about 4 p.m. to about 5-ish. Very sharp, very intense. There's going to be about 1,500 casualties. And then, in November, it gets dark pretty early. The darkness is going to call off this battle. When the sun sets, it's a stalemate. Tactically, at Payne's Farm, this is a stalemate. Neither side could really get the advantage. Strategically, which is kind of the big picture, this is a huge Confederate victory, and I'll tell you why. We just talked about it. Basically, by Allegheny Johnson going in aggressively, he prevented 2 Union corps from linking up with Warren, who really didn't want to bring on an engagement until he had that support, which he never got. So 5,000 troops kept 30,000 troops from being in play. Okay, so strategically, this was a big Confederate victory. As a matter of fact, this is going to kind of unravel Meade's original plan here with the debacle with French and the action here at Payne's Farm. Which, on that note, the American Battlefield Trust has saved this portion of the battlefield. This is the only portion of the Mine Run battlefield that's been saved. Most people, unfortunately, think this is the only part of the battlefield, but we're going to talk a little bit more about what happens after Payne's Farm and if there's any preservation opportunities out there. So it gets dark. The Confederates withdraw. It's not until that night or the next morning that the Army of the Potomac finally meets up at Robinson's Tavern. Okay? And this is a drawing looking down the road along the Orange Turnpike. Okay, so the Wilderness, let's say everybody in the audience is the Wilderness Battlefield that you know today. If you kept on going down the Constitution Highway past the Exxon station, the General's Quarters restaurant, this would be your view. And the Confederates are gone, like ghosts in the night. And so the Federals are going to send skirmishers forward to find out where did they go. And the skirmishers are going to go forward, and they're going to start to see the Confederates are now across a creek right here. You can't see it, but this is the Mine Run Creek that runs right through here. And behind the Mine Run Creek are some steep, sloping heights right there. And now everything changes dramatically. Let me get to my notes right here, because I have some quotes from some Federals about what they saw. The best quote came from a New York surgeon from the 121st New York. And this is basically speaks for a lot of the Federals, what they saw right here. Of all the hard-looking places, that of the Mine Run was the hardest I ever beheld. Stretching as far as the eye could reach from left to right on the crest of a low range of hills across the stream was a continuous line of defenses, upon which and in which could be seen the enemy strengthening their works and preparing to give us a warm reception. Upon that freezing day, intervening between our lines and theirs was a low, swampy stretch of marsh through which the Mine Run wound its serpentine course to make still more difficult a crossing. They had sharpened stakes and driven the bottom full. They had dammed the stream in several places, and as a consequence, an overflow and seeping of its water was the result. Immediately after crossing, as you began to ascend the hill towards their works, trees had been felled with topped branches, and these sharpened to a point, presenting a front perfectly impossible to overcome. All along the heights could be seen battery upon battery, some masked while others were clearly perceptible, ready to belch their iron contents of grape and canister into the stiffening, freezing flesh of the best blood of America. This is Daniel Holt of the 121st New York, a surgeon. And so now everything has changed. Meade's original plan is thrown out the window. His speed and surprise are all gone. And now he has Robert E. Lee entrenching along this Mine Run Creek for a couple of miles. And now we put the brakes on the entire operation here on November the 28th. And now Meade, an engineer, is going to look for any way he could get at Robert E. Lee to salvage this operation. And this is kind of how it looks. So we have the Army of the Potomac. They've all rendezvoused at Robinson's Tavern, all right. And you can see the blue line is the Mine Run. And on the other side is, on the heights and whatnot, is the Army of Northern Virginia. You heard the surgeon's account. They've dammed the creek in several places where the water has seeped in. We already established that we had heavy rain for 2 days. It's a swampy bog. down there, and minute by minute, the Confederates are improving their position with earthworks, with battery positions. They're sharpening stakes. Do we really want to do this? Is there any way we can get at Lee right here? So they're going to spend the rest of the day here on November the 28th looking at this thing. And at the end of the day, Meade is going to have a kind of a council of war, a powwow with his corps commanders. Does anybody have any ideas? Does anybody have a plan to get old Robert E. Lee behind the Mine Run? One general does. General Warren, the savior of Little Round Top, the engineer. He says, well, I noticed that off to our left, it opens up. There's no more Mine Run Creek, and there's no more Rebs out there. Maybe we can get on Robert E. Lee's flank if we can just get around that way. There's no other option to the plate, and Meade says, you know, let's go ahead and do that. So the next day, on the 29th, we kind of have Warren's flank attack march. That's kind of what I call it. Warren is going to take his Second Corps, and he's going to backtrack out of the Confederates' eyes. Okay, they're not just going to slide over. They're going to backtrack. He's going to take his entire Second Corps, but then they're going to take one Union division from every single corps and give it to Warren. So he's going to have over 2 Union Corps numerically doing this march. It's going to take all day because he doesn't have the best roads. It's going to be difficult to get his artillery, especially into place. And when he does, there's no Confederates in sight. He gets everything set up kind of late. He doesn't want to attack late in the day. He's afraid of casualties laying on the battlefield at night in cold weather. That's one thing that I didn't mention, was that it's very cold. A lot of the accounts are talking about, you know, really cold conditions. The photo that we saw earlier, we saw the Federal soldiers in those big greatcoats that we don't normally see at battlefields like Gettysburg or Manassas when we have almost triple digits. So it's taking him, all day to get around. There's his kind of march going off in that direction. And so the plan is, on November the 30th, is for about 8 a.m., the main Federal line is going to lay a massive barrage, okay? And after the guns stop, Warren is going to have a massive flank attack against Lee's line here, and Sedgwick and Sykes are going to try to flank it over here. That's our plan. Now, this is relying a lot on surprise, right? He kind of pulled out so it'd be a surprise. Strict orders overnight, no campfires, okay? We don't want to let Lee know that we're going to do this operation, okay? It's so cold that there's accounts that canteens are going to freeze, and soldiers' mustaches are going to freeze. There's reports of hypothermia, those soldiers that are out on picket duty especially. And so Warren wakes up at dawn to get ready for this big flank attack. And this is what he sees. So again, Warren has shifted over, right over here. The Confederate line ended right here on the Orange Plank Road. And overnight, Lee shifted all of his reserves to meet this threat. What just happened? Well, we talked about Confederate cavalry was operating over here. And having over 2 Union Corps back out and move over in this direction, they were spotted by rebel cavalry. And word went back to Robert E. Lee and he's going to make an adjustment in his line. And now Warren is looking at his front, looking at his opposition. And things just don't look very good. I have some accounts of what they saw. And this is another echo of Fredericksburg, by the way. The U.S. Army facing the Confederates' fortified defense against insurmountable odds. Warren is going to say, as the sun shone upon the enemy's lines, I examined the whole front. The line had been reinforced with all the troops and artillery that could be put in position with breastworks and epaulments and abatis perfected. Warren's aide is going to say, it's Fredericksburg or worse again. At Fredericksburg, I think the artillery could not have hit our men if they once had reached the foot of the heights. At Fredericksburg, the Federals got under the guns about 400 or 500 yards. But here, the infantry and artillery would have fair shooting until we reached the muzzle of the guns. Warren will say, if I succeed today, I shall be the greatest man in the army. If I don't, all of my sins will be remembered. He will go on to say that the full light of the sun shows me that I cannot succeed. And he's going to write a letter to his wife and say, it fell upon me to decide we should not waste our men's lives in a hopeless assault to make up for previous blunder. Rest assured I did right, and all in the army will say so. Based upon the Confederates opposing him, he is going to suspend this attack. As his men of the 2nd Corps, we've established they are veterans, are writing their names on slips of paper and pinning them to their backs, because this is going to be a massive bloodshed. Warren, and keep in mind, the artillery barrage has already started. The guns have already started to fire down range. And Warren is going to make a command decision to call off the attack. He's going to send a messenger back to headquarters where Meade is at to basically say, look, I'm calling off the attack unless, you give me a direct order. So Meade is at his headquarters as the guns are firing. And we know that Meade is one of the most calm, most temperate men in the Army of the Potomac, right? His nickname is the Old Snapping Turtle. We would probably say today Meade would have an anger management problem. So when Meade gets this report at his headquarters, Meade is going to say, my God, General Warren has half of my army at his disposal. And Meade's staff officer is going to say, disappointment was on every man's face. And Meade is going to jump on his horse and ride over to meet with Warren and have a little face-to-face here. And when Meade rode to Warren's headquarters, one soldier said he looked as savage as anyone could for calling off this attack. And as Meade the engineer stood there and looked at Warren's front, he's going to say, well, there is no use in trying to mount a wall with fire ladders. And Meade will call off this attack. Warren will call it off, but the buck stops right here with Meade. Okay, he's in charge of the Army of the Potomac. He's going to personally sign off on this. Meade is going to say afterwards a letter to his wife. Astounding intelligence reached me just 10 minutes before the hour of attacking. Okay? So he got there right 10 minutes before the guns went silent and everybody was going to go in. Okay? There's a lot, not to get sidetracked, but there's a lot of World War I movies where there's a tremendous barrage and we need to call off this attack, and at the last minute somebody calls off the attack before everybody goes into no man's land. So it's a very similar situation. Astounding intelligence reached me just 10 minutes after the hour of attacking, and barely in time to suspend the attack. Meade will say to his wife in a letter afterwards, "If I had thought there was any reasonable degree of probability of success, I would have attacked. I did not think so. On the contrary, I believed it could result in a useless and criminal slaughter of brave men, and might result in a serious disaster of the army." So, the rest of the day, the Army of the Potomac will look for another way to get at Lee. They'll have another kind of council or powwow to say, does any corps commander see an opportunity? Early in the day, Sedgwick saw an opportunity on the Confederate left flank where there's kind of a horseshoe bend to get at Lee's flank. But with Warren calling off the attack and Meade calling it off, Jubal Early is going to make an adjustment to his line. So that opportunity sailed. There basically is no opportunity here on November the 30th. That night, they're going to make a decision to withdraw, get out of this, and go back, cross the Rapidan and go back where they started in Culpeper. What the Army of the Potomac is going to do is they're going to start digging their own earthworks. And that's going to absolutely confuse Robert E. Lee. Why are the Federals starting to dig in right here? And that's just to kind of mask their withdrawal. And so here we have the Army of the Potomac on the afternoon of December the 1st of 1863. The Army of the Potomac is going to start to make their withdrawal back across Germanna Ford, actually passing right by us here at Lake of the Woods right here, and Culpeper Mine Ford. Most of them are going to withdraw overnight, the night of December 1st into December the 2nd. As the Federals withdraw, they're frustrated and they're angry. They're really relieved, though, that the attack was called off, but they're still frustrated and angry. And whatever they get their hands on, they're going to loot. They're going to loot a tannery in Locust Grove and other buildings. Of course, we know of a very good account as they're going down the Orange Turnpike. They're going to go by Elwood Manor, and they're going to throw the entire library out into the yard of Elwood. And we sort of see that homage in this painting right here, because what's on the ground here in the 1864 Battle of the Wilderness are books that were thrown out during the Mine Run campaign. Okay? So the Army of the Potomac is going to make it across. Lee is eventually going to send A.P. Hill's corps forward to find out what's going on and find out that they slipped out of the way there. Meade will write to his wife, finding Lee too strongly posted and entrenched to justify my attacking him and not being able to make any further tactical movement on his flank, I felt it was my duty to withdraw the army. I feel the course greatly disappointed, a little bit more good fortune, and I should have met with brilliant success. after the Battle of Mine Run, one U.S. soldier will say, "We all would have been slaughtered. This man saved our lives and did not waste them for nothing." But one soldier from the 1st Minnesota probably summed it up best after the Battle of Mine Run. He will say, "I have never felt deeper gratitude to the man who had the moral courage to delay an order which implied death and nothing else." And this leads to the moral courage of George Gordon Meade, the man who decided to call off an attack, which might sound kind of simple to us, but how many Civil War battles do we know that seemed absolutely insane and nobody called off the attack, right? You think of Fredericksburg or Cold Harbor or Franklin. Didn't anybody have the notion to call off this attack? Meade, a guy tough as nails, a snapping turtle, had the moral courage to say no. Meade is going to place the lives of his men ahead of himself. Meade does not want to sacrifice his army. When everything was on his shoulders and everything said attack, he will put his reputation and career on the line for the lives of his men. Everything said attack, right? Match the success of Grant. The investigation after Gettysburg. His critics, Sickles and others, the power of the press. The American people demand, some sort of success. The burden of Lincoln's reelection. All of that he's going to put on hold for the lives of his men. So this is the moral courage of George Gordon Meade. As a result, he will earn the undying affection from the Army of the Potomac, his men, and this will impress Grant more than the hero of Gettysburg. And some historians will say this is perhaps Meade's greatest moment, Meade's moral courage. We would not have the Army of the Potomac at the Battle of the Wilderness that you and I know if he would have sacrificed his men on the banks of the Mine Run. As we wrap things up, I want to mention briefly why are battlefields forgotten. This is part of the forgotten fall of 1863. Real quick, battlefields are forgotten because of the number of combatants or casualties. If there's not a lot of troops or the casualties aren't very high, maybe it's not as dramatic or interesting. There were 2,000 casualties here at the Battle of Mine Run. The Civil War, I hate to compare the Civil War to your favorite TV series. Not every episode of a series is super dramatic like the season finale and other things. However, if you miss an episode, you might miss some important information that might be helpful down the road. The number of casualties here, a lot of people will gloss over the Battle of Mine Run. Lack of a defined battlefield. Can you see the battlefield today? Is it preserved? Do you have access to it? We didn't save a yard of ground until 12, 15 years ago. Lack of Civil War media. Are we writing about this? Are there articles, posts? Are there documentaries about it? Civil War popular culture, right? We kind of gravitate towards these epic battles, right? We always hear about Antietam or Gettysburg. So these are several reasons why battlefields are forgotten, including Mine Run. We're doing some things lately to help with that. Before, this was the only book for decades. Within the past 5 years, we have a map book on the Battle of Mine Run. You've seen some of them. I got them from the author Bradley Godfrey. He also wrote the Maps of Wilderness. Also, Chris Makowski came out less than 5 years ago about a book. Real quick, about 5 years ago, there's been a lot of interest of the Civil War after Gettysburg. What happened those 10 months? An author named Jeffrey Hunt, for the past 3 years, has come up with a new book. One on Meade and Lee after Gettysburg, and then the Forgotten Fall. Bristow Station, This year he came out with Rappahannock Station, and guess what? Next year there's going to be a mine run book. So we're getting more literature, more writing about this forgotten battlefield. I want to point out that these 3 battlefields of the Forgotten Fall, Rappahannock Station, that is a Prince William County park with paid county employees. Rappahannock Station, that is going to be part of the brand new Culpeper State Park with river access, and that's going to have state park paid, full-time paid employees. The Battle of Mine Run has no entity that's taking care of it. Only a portion owned by the American Battlefield Trust is saved. There is no Friends of the Mine Run Battlefield or any other organization. There's individuals that are trying to do our part. I know the Friends of the Wilderness is kind of taking care of this battlefield, or some of their members, I should say. One thing I want to mention is at the last Central Virginia Battlefield Trust meeting, symposium, just the other month, they made a huge announcement that they're going to add the Mine Run Battlefield to their list of 5 battlefields that they're going to preserve. So they're looking for more battlefield property to preserve this forgotten battlefield. Quick map of Paynes Farm and what has been preserved. Part of our tour is going to go out here. Unfortunately, most people think this is the Battle of Mine Run, but there's much more to it. Our tour is later on is going to cover a lot of the area outside of Paynes Farm. Real quick, I personally believe one of the best ways to define a battlefield so it's not forgotten is with the Excellent Civil War Trails program. There's several individuals, including myself, that want to define this battlefield with many more interpretive signs so that we can see this battlefield. We can't really see it, the ordinary citizen, but if we start to post these signs to define it, each one of these signs, by the way, costs $2,200. So a couple of us, Jack and myself, we would love to get at least one sign out there for the 160th anniversary for the Battle of Mine Run in November of 2023. If you're interested in helping out with Mine Run, or you know of other people, I would love to talk to you or talk to your friends. Just a little bit of, I guess an announcement which Jack said. Side note, I ran a battlefield tour service called Fredericksburg Tours of the 4 area battlefields, and I wanted to share that we ran into a happy problem of people wanting to tour more battlefields. The very first battlefield that I added to our list was this battlefield, Mine Run, and then the North Anna, and we've expanded from the Shenandoah to Richmond, really. So I just kind of wanted to put, just to be more familiar with who I am and what organization I'm with. We're no longer Fredericksburg Tours. As of a few months ago, we're now Battlefield Tours of Virginia. We have several really good guides. You might recognize some faces here. I hear some chuckles, so you do, especially some of the ones on the far right over there. But we have some retired National Park historians, Culpeper subject matter expert Michael Block. A lot of these guys are authors. You might recognize Stuart Henderson. So we're really doing this to get people out on the battlefields. We have the insurance policies, we have the permits from the National Park to get people mobile on these fields. And that ends my talk on the Battle of Mine Run. I've probably gone a little over, but do we have time for questions? 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, you betcha.
All right, thank you. Oh, in the back, Bob.
Being the cynic that I am, the reason that Mine Run doesn't get more press is because it wasn't a crushing Union victory. Like I said, that's just my opinion. If you had unmitigated slaughter out there, then you probably have hundreds of thousands of acres.
That's
They
true.
were trying to work around, and the sense is that they felt Lee would stay behind those defenses. And it's one thing to talk about those defenses, but what you laid out there gives you that mental image of why Lee might stay behind those defenses, why the Union, the head shed would have thought that he would stay behind those defenses.
Right.
And allow them to kind of skirt around. Obviously, Lee wasn't thinking the same way that they were thinking, but anyway,
Yes.
your slide there was a wonderful, mental image for that situation.
Right. Very good point. And you reminded me of something. I kind of trimmed my talk a little bit, but at the end of the battle, Lee was really upset at himself because he stayed in those earthworks hoping for another Fredericksburg. And as we know, Lee is the one that likes to seize the initiative. But in staying in his earthworks, he gave up the initiative and allowed Meade to get away. And Lee kind of beat himself up afterwards and said, I should have never let those people get away. But we did see at the beginning of the battle, Meade was very bold and aggressive and went right after Meade on a head-on collision course, which is exactly what he did at the opening shots of the Wilderness, a head-on collision course. But we also saw how the Wilderness negates the numbers. Why Lee wanted to fight in the Wilderness during the 1864 battle, because it negates your numerical superiority. We saw that with Allegheny Johnson, right? He had, on paper, he had 30,000 people, soldiers, and he had 5,000. But the ones in his front were only maybe 2,000, right? Because the Wilderness will negate your numbers. Very good points. Anything else?
What happened to Prince and French as a result of their leadership?
They are going to go to other pastures. Really, that's the long story short. Some of these guys just aren't going to be around. And then the long story short, they're going to cobble the Army of the Potomac, kind of meld 1st and 3rd Corps into some other corps, and we're going to come up with our four corps that we know at the Wilderness. But, yes.
Your map showed that Mine Run ended
Yes.
to the Union left. Is the headwaters of Mine Run
It's-
just at that edge of where
Yeah,
East was?
it's a little finger of the Rapidan. And those of you taking the tour, you might look at it and think, oh, that's really small. I went out there real quick a couple weeks ago before the tour, and it was maybe a trickle. But then I've been there before where it's just a rushing. But the Mine Run itself is kind of a speed bump before you get to the steep ridge. But yeah, good questions. Anything else?
Okay, well,
Okay.
thank you so much, John.
All right. My pleasure.
Sorry for my papers getting all the way.
Oh, that's okay.
And I just wanted to highlight here too that we're finding more and more because of, for example, the development of wilderness crossing coming, and the activities of the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust organization too, and that history is almost being superseded by preservation now as a concern in our area anyway, with good reason. And as Bob Lookbill was mentioning this last Saturday at the annual meeting of the Friends of Wilderness Battlefield, Tom Van Winkle and Terry Renzel were presenting from the CVPD about some of the preservation that they're hoping to do around Mine Run. So we're very happy to have this, and it seems to me that John's presentation was both focused, informative, and really timely for us too, living here at Lake of the Woods. And so thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm going to turn on the lights. And,
Focus up.
Oh, no. Oh, I'm thinking of taking out my mic.
oh, okay.
Do you want to talk about the tour at all, or?
Yeah, just,
or
yes, just
meet
briefly,
at one? Yeah.
I'm gonna turn it over to you, but, again, to say, it's just now, a quarter to, 12, and, an hour from now, we'll want to meet those of you who are going on the tour this afternoon. We want to meet, just out front, at the front doors here, and you can be inside as well. The dining rooms are being set up for events that are coming, this evening, but you can lounge in this area and in the president's room, just to the
Top of this.
left as you're coming in the doors, right as you're, anyway, right at the top of the doors. You can lounge in that area. There are nicely appointed restrooms just down the hall as well. And we want to get everybody back together at about 1:45 so that we can load the bus, shove all the horses in there and so forth, so we're ready to go. And John, anything that you'd like to say here too, as we're getting ready to go?
Not really, other than if you're taking the tour, make sure you have a jacket or whatever you need to stay warm. It might be cold out there. We heard about the cold conditions during the talk. I'll give more announcements at the vehicle so that those of you that aren't taking the tour aren't held up here. But I'll just see everybody before 1 o'clock. Dress warm.
All right. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. And if you can help me.
Before you go, please remember to visit our website often, civilwarstudygroup.org. We make every attempt on a regular basis to provide informative content. Thank you for visiting, and God bless.